What is going on, guys? Today I'm going to show you how to use C++ from the perspective of blueprints. So for this tutorial you need to know blueprints and how they work and how to use them. But if you know that, then after this tutorial you should have a pretty good understanding of how C++ works, because technically blueprints is C++ just in a visual form. So whatever you make in blueprints, I will show you how to convert over to C++. Now for this, I'm not going to show you how to make specific like gameplay features or anything. You already have those. You don't need me to show those. I'm going to make a print string function though that happens on begin play, and I'll show you both how the C++ files correlate to what a blueprint looks like. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. So to start, you have to add C++ to your project, and to do that, you go up to Tools at the top if you're in UE5, and I think it was under Windows or File in UE4, and then you go to New C++ Class. Now for this, we just need to add a C++ class. You probably want to start with none, because this will convert your project into supporting C++. But for the sake of this tutorial, I just need an actor, so I'm going to create an actor type. Now in blueprints, this is basically the same thing as right-clicking, going to blueprint class, and then choosing from here. The difference is in the C++ version, it just does it as in C++ instead of blueprints. So I'm going to create an actor. Okay, we got to give it a name, and you'll leave everything else default for class type. And this is this runtime thing is your project. So if you have like plugins, you can store them in plugins or stuff like that, and you'll see those in the drop down. But for the sake of this, we'll just do this. You can put them in a folder, so you can like add a new folder, and you have to go to your project and do that. But I'm just gonna leave it in the root of the source file. So, and I'll show you what the source folder is in just a second. So we'll just call this CPP print string, because the blueprint I'm using for reference to teach is called BPC print string. So we'll create this. Okay, I'm going to cut the video here, and whenever it's done, I'll show you. Okay, so now that it's done, you'll probably have this message come up. This project now includes source. Please close the editor and build from your IDE. So you will need Visual Studio or Writer installed on your computer. I am using Writer because Writer is far superior to Visual Studio for C++. If you're going to be coding in C++, I highly recommend you get Writer. It does cost money, but they give you a perpetual license after a year, and I think they have like an experimental version you can get for free if you sign up for that. But if you're going to code in C++, please use Writer, because Visual Studio is just not good. So I'm going to close the editor, and I'm going to restart. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit yes, sure. So it's going to be loading Writer, and I've got to, once it loads up, if you also, before you set your IDE, by default it will be in Visual Studio. But if you go to Editor Preferences, and then you go down to, where is it? I think you just type in IDE or code, source code editor. So if you type in code and go to General Source Code, you'll see the source code editor. If you have Writer installed, you can use that, but they have different options. So they got like 10x, CLion, Writer, Visual Studio Code. So you can just pick which one you want. I highly recommend Writer, but that's just me. Okay, so we're going to open that up, and then I need to close the editor because it wanted me to close it. So now that we're in the editor, or the editor for code, which is Writer, okay, we'll have a thing over here in the side called Solution, and Visual Studio it might be on this side, but everything that you need will be under Games. And then it's got to load. I'm going to cut this out and then re-edit it to come back whenever it's done syncing the project. So now that Writer's finished indexing the code editor, so you'll have Games and Engine. Programs, rules, and visualizers, don't worry too much about that, okay? So under Games, you'll have your project name, dependencies, config, and source. Source is where most of your C++ files will be. This is the folder I mentioned earlier. When you create a C++ project or convert a blueprint one to C++, you'll get this source folder. Do not delete this source folder. This is where all the source code for CPP and H goes. So in this case, we have two files, a CPP file and then .h file. I'm going to focus on the .h file first, and then I'll go over the CPP file, but just to give you a brief overview of what they do, .h tells you, declares all the variables, and CPP writes the code. So I'm going to go ahead and open up I'm going to cut this and open up the project so I can give you a visual overview of how the header file works. Okay, so when you open a Blueprint, you're familiar with the event graph, but the header file is essentially this thing over here and this over here. So let's take this Blueprint string, for example. So when you click on it, you get these options: variable name, variable type, instance editable. You'd set these in the header file. So like instance editable, blueprint read only, expose and spawn, private, expose cinematics. Those are what are called uProperty macros. So I'll show you in a minute what those are. But in Blueprints, you just check a box. In C++, you just type it out, and the engine will recognize it. So in this case, we have a variable that we plug into a print string on begin play. So you also have the components. Now you will be setting components probably in Blueprints through a child class. That's how I recommend doing it, because it's easier to do that in Blueprints instead of C++. But you can also do it in C++. I'll have to make that another tutorial, but for now, let's focus on the variables. So if you look here, we have public, protected, and public again. So this is a public variable. So everything here is public. Actually, I'm sorry. If we make it instance editable, it's public. So this is a public variable. So if we wanted to make this, we'll call it CPP string. So if we wanted to make this, what we would do is we would hit enter under public, and we would type in uProperty. And the reason we're doing uProperty is this is how the engine recognizes the variable for different things. So we'll call this blueprint getter. Actually, we'll call it blueprint read write. You can also do blueprint read only, but either way. And this way we can set it and get it in Blueprint event graph. So now that we have that, we are going to do a f string. So they're not called strings; they're called f strings in C++. And then we'll call this CPP string. And then we'll put a semicolon after to tell the compiler, hey, we're done with this line of code. Okay. uProperties, which are macros, don't need the semicolon after them, but any line of code does need a semicolon after it. So basically, we just created this right here. So now we have this in C++. We have our own version of that. So now what we want to do is we want to create a print string function. So we are going to make we could do this under private. This would be a good example on private. So private means that the functions here, or variables, can't be used by other classes. So if we were to inherit from, say we were to inherit a blueprint from this, we can't use the functions in private. We don't need to. We don't need to call them. So if you wanted to call one of these from blueprints, you would have to put it in public. So with that said, let's go ahead and make a u function. And as you notice, everything is kind of standardized with the u title. That means Unreal, and that's how they coded it. So we're not gonna give this any type of what would you call it, like specifier, because we're just going to use this directly in C++. So we'll call this void, and the reason we're calling this void is because we don't want to return anything. If we wanted to return like a string, we would call it fstring cpp print string. And also one thing to note is when you put a capital letter, it creates a space in the editor. So this is going to type out as 3 words. So just keep that in mind. You can't type out, like if you do this, it won't recognize it. So you got to use caps. But in this case, we're just going to use void. And you can put pretty much any type of variable. You can put structs, and then we got to put parentheses on here to tell it it's a function. So you can put structs, strings, vectors, whatever. You can output whatever you want on here. And then what we're going to do is, I'm using Writer. I think Visual Studio has this too, but if you right-click the function and then click Generate Definition, it'll take you to the CPP file and create the function setup for you. So now what we need to do is we need to figure out how do we take this string and put it into C++. Well, Blueprints tells us. So Blueprints tells us that if we hover over the print string node, you can see where it says target is Kismet System Library. Kismet System Library is a class in, it's a Blueprint library that you can also use in C++. So if you go to Unreal's documentation, and it's kind of hard to find on Google now. I don't know why. Ever since they changed this website, it became kind of hard. But if you type in like Kismet System Library, so if something says, you know, Kismet System Library, assume there's going to be a U in front of it for a library. So we have this Kismet System Library in the documentation. So we need to go to, we need to print string. So if we just search for that, we can find it. So we can do this print string here. And this function will tell us what we need. So it tells us the module we need in the CS file. This comes with pretty much every engine, so you don't need to add this. But if this was something like UMG, you would have to add that. And the way you would do that is you would go to the YouTube tutorials.build.cs or whatever your project name is. And then you see where these public dependency models are with the name. You would just be like if you're using something from UMG widget, you just type in UMG, and now the editor can, and now the code can recognize it. But I don't need to do that because engine is already in here. So if you're having linker issues, it's probably the module. If you get an issue saying like LNK or link or something like that in the code editor, it's probably the module. So the next important thing we need is the include. So the include tells CPP how to reference it. So if we go back to the CPP file and we go up here, we can click this, we can see this include, and we can just copy paste that in. Now right now Writer's showing it as gray because I don't have the print string function in there, but once the print string function goes in there, Writer's going to recognize this as gray. So now in order to access the print string function, what we do is we type in Kismet System Library. Now it'll find it because now you see it's green. So we use two, not semicolons, I guess they're called colons. We use two colons, and now we can access the functions from this class. So colons gives you the functions of a class. So let's say print string. Okay. So the world object is going to be this. That's going to be the actor that we're currently in, which is something we're going to place in the level. Okay. And as you see, it says UObject. So Writer gives you things you need, but if you don't have that in Visual Studio or your code editor, you go to the documentation. I'll tell you. So it takes a UObject, an F string, 2 bools, and a text color. Some of these may not be necessary to input, but we'll see. It'll tell us if it's necessary. So let's do a string. To create a string, you just do 2 parentheses. And we'll just call this is a CPP actor. Okay. And then that's actually all the print string needs. The rest are filled in by the function itself. But if we wanted to set the duration, we could add more in here. So like we could do print a string, true, print a log, true. The color would be, let's see, it's an F linear color. So we could just do the one it says F linear color red. We'll just do red. They have some preset ones that you can get from the F linear color. Now, F linear color, I believe, is a class, so you may need to include it. We may need to look that up and include it, but we'll see when it compiles. Right now, it's not giving any errors. Okay, so now for the duration, I'm going to set this to 10 seconds, and that's all we need. Yeah, so now we have the same thing that we had in Blueprints. But we do need to add it to begin play. So in order to do that, we have this begin play here. Always leave the super here. Just hit enter under it, and then we'll call CPP print string. And that's it. Now when we put this in the level on begin play, it should print string. So I'm going to go over this one more time real quick, just a brief overview of what we did. So we created a U property that we can access in Blueprints if we create a child actor of this or inherit from this. And then we created a private function that's only called in C++ on the C++ begin play called CPP print string. And then we made a method, which is another name for function. So that would be like doing this. That would be like custom event BP print string. So that would be like this. This is basically what we did. There's one thing I noticed that I didn't do, and I didn't put the string in there, so I'll show you how to do that. So instead of this is a C++ actor, what we can do is we can call CPP string. So we have an actor called, or a variable called CPP string, and if we just add that in, it'll recognize it. Now, when you're working in C++, I highly recommend putting individual things into their own methods. So that way it makes calling them easy and modifying code easy as well. If you have, the way I was taught is if you have code logic and you have to say and, so like I'm printing a string and doing a line trace, then you want to split those two up into different functions or methods. Okay, so now what I'll show you how to do is compile this. So you don't want to go up here and go to build. You want to go to your games. You want to go under games and then project and then build. If you're using the Epic Games Launcher version of Unreal, you can use rebuild. But if you're using a source build from GitHub, then you'll want to use build. Rebuild will compile everything in your project back again, and then build just compiles what was recently done. If you do rebuild on a source engine build, it'll likely rebuild the engine as well, which will take a very long time. So keep that in mind. So we're going to stop this and build it. And then once this is done, I will go into the editor and I'll show you how the two work with the print strings. Okay, so it's done. So in order to open the editor, you just click the play button in your IDE. Make sure it's on the project name. And yeah, so it's going to load up here. And then we'll go into the level. And we will add the blueprint and the C++, and we'll see both of them print strings. Okay, so we have the blueprint in here. This is the blueprint. And then if we go down to C++ classes, if you don't see this, go to settings, show C++ classes. Okay, and we'll go to YouTube tutorials and we'll see CPP print string. So we can add that in there as well. And you won't see it because it doesn't have a default scene root, but it's in there. You can see it in the world outliner. So now if we were to click simulate, so I know why it wasn't calling, because we forgot to set the CPP string. So it was calling, it was just there's no string set, so it was empty. So to do that, we can just set the F string, CPP string to something like this is the CPP actor. And if you wanted to, you could also like edit this in Blueprints with the edit defaults only, edit anywhere, edit instance only. So if you make like a Blueprint version of this, a Blueprint child, you can edit that. So we'll go ahead and close this out, because every time we do a new change to the header file or CPP file, we need to rebuild. That's the downside of C++. So I recommend making things in Blueprints first and then moving them to C++, so you don't have to rebuild it or build all the time. So yeah, if we get into the editor, it should say both are there now. And then the final thing I'm going to show you is how to build a or generate the solution file. So we type in, are they both here? No, they're not. So let's go to Blueprints to C++. Okay, so now they should both pop up when we do this. Yep. So we have the red, this is a CPP actor, and the blue, this is from Blueprints. So yeah, that's basically how you do it. Remember, if you're making something in Blueprints and you want to know where the node is, or like what class the node is in, just hover over it. Like 99% of the time, Epic has told you target is something, and you'll just have to find in their C++ API that name. So like in this case, it's Kismet System Library. If you do like vector up, right, it says Kismet Math Library. So if you're making things in Blueprints, you can easily convert them over to C++. There's also C++ specific libraries, and not everything is Kismet. Those are just the two examples I used. The final thing I want to show you is how to generate a solution file. So to do this, you need to go into your file explorer. Okay, so in the folder for the project, we have a couple new folders. So we have VS, idea is for writer. If you're using writer, you'll have an idea folder. And then you'll have the source, and you'll have a solution file. Mine says JetBrains Writer, but it will say solution file. So it'll be a .sln. There will also be a VS config. Do not delete these, or your project will probably break. So if, or you can actually delete the solution folder, but in order to get it back, what you have to do is you have to first exit out of everything. And then what you can do is, so if we delete this, so let's say we delete the intermediate, right? And then we delete, yeah, so we do that. So in order to generate these, you have to right click the U project folder or file and click Generate Visual Studio Project Files. If you're in Mac and you're using Writer, you'll want to do this in the editor because you have to do it via command line on Mac. But in Windows, it's pretty simple. And then this pop-up will appear, and you pretty much just let it go. And then you can open the solution file like this. You know, open the code editor, and then from there, you can go to the project. Or you can just open the U project if you're not using the code editor that day. That is basically it for like going from Blueprints to C++. I hope this helps, and have a good one. Like and sub if you like the video.